music in education.
Yes.
So we are, welcome everybody, and we're looking at this from really three perspectives that interconnect. Melissa Kane's perspective is very much on the state of multicultural music in education, and not only in Australia, but it relates to many other places. I have taught with Melissa in Singapore at Singapore American School, but I've also taught at many international schools. I'm now, though, in my home country of Canada. And what we notice is, as Melissa describes it, is this inverted pyramid where at the top there's a lot of philosophical writing and discussion on multicultural or diverse musics in education. It comes down to a little less on when it gets to policy, a little less when it comes to methodology. When it actually comes to the practice, there's very, very little practice actually happening in schools. And so that's Melissa's angle, and she'll be talking about that more tomorrow as well. It's really interesting to see the research that she has done. She is a researcher here with Griffith University. And then Shari can talk about her perspective.
So I'm also a researcher here at Griffith, working with Professor Skippers, and my particular focus is looking at world music education, culturally diverse music, and its influence on children's creativity. So in particular, I'm looking at how children who have not learned a variety of new musics have been fairly enculturated in the Western style, how they actually respond to learning new music, and does this actually make a difference to them as far as their compositions, as far as their approach, not in just the musical sense, but actually also in the extra musical sense, so looking at their effect on their cognitive thinking and their creative thinking. So I've also been conducting a series of workshops with children primary age from 6 to 10 and looking at a selection of different musics. The musics that we've actually chosen for this project have been ones that children can tend to pick up relatively easily. Percussive traditions, particularly West African djembe, Japanese gamelan, which we actually have a really nice gamelan orchestra here, and also something maybe that's not as traditional to teach younger ones is the North Indian tabla. So we've just finished 6 months of this work, and now looking at the results, and it's proving quite interesting.
And then Jen. So my work, I am a PhD candidate here at Griffith University, though I am Canadian, I'm in Canada. And
Education.
my work is really looking at the practical side, and I have been teaching music for 30 years or so now, and have always brought diverse musics into the program, and a lot of that was because of my background of living overseas, and first ending up in Taiwan, where I had just about graduated from university, and I went to a university in the States, and it was a student teaching program, and getting to Taiwan and thinking I was terribly clever, as we all do at 21 or so, and being taken to a Chinese opera that was just happening on the street, but I didn't even know that's where we were going. I just suddenly was at this night market and heard this sound and walked around the corner, and the spectacle was, to use an old term, mind-blowing, to see the sight of Chinese opera and to hear the instruments and the sounds of the voices. I realized, okay, I know nothing about this. And what really, really bothered me was the fact that I watched the audience watch the Chinese opera, and they knew everything that was going on, and that really annoyed me that I really had no clue. And then it also dawned upon me, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about so many different musics. And that's where it started with me incorporating music from different cultures into the classroom. I was teaching at Taipei American School and realized that a lot of the students really weren't aware of this rich cultural stuff happening just off campus. I won't say that all the teachers were guilty of that, because some of them were very involved in that, but in general, students just weren't that interested. And so working in the international school system allows you to bounce to a lot of different areas of the world. And I just kept adding on different countries. And of course, I'd study the music and the language of each country. I was in Colombia, South America, for a few years, and then moved to Syria and studied music and language there while I was teaching at the international schools. And each place just kept building up more of a repertoire of music happening around the world, but bringing it into the classroom. So for me, it's been a lot of first-hand exposure. What I also started to realize, though, when I was living in Malaysia, was that not only can you find out about a lot of diverse musics living in these countries, but you can also be finding musicians in your own home country or hometowns. Just this past summer, I got connected up in Calgary with Midnight Taiko, which is a taiko drumming group. I've studied Senegalese djembe, also in Calgary. So this became a realization that, okay, you don't have to actually go to these different countries. But what it has become a real stymie for many, many teachers is how do I start doing this? How do I even begin to be incorporating diverse musics into the program? And again, this is something we're going to be really talking about more as we experience the workshop tomorrow. I'm going to be looking at, all right, where do I start? It's sort of like a person who wants to start running. It's like making those first few steps out the door are usually the worst few steps, and once you get past that, it's like, oh, okay, I can do this. So that's what we're going to be looking at.
Yeah. And what we thought today, since it's quite a small group of us, is that we conduct this a little bit like an interview. So I'm going to ask Jen some questions about some of her experiences and vice versa, but we'd also welcome some comments and experiences from you as well, since we have a small group. So one of the first points we wanted to discuss today, which I think is very much relevant for world music, but it can of course be extended to all musics as well, is the fact that the nature of many of the world's traditions rely on oral learning and nothing written down. Things are learnt much more in a social environment, often in a family, religious situation. So the social context of that learning is quite important. Part of that is also the fact that the musics rely a lot on improvisation. So something that is not completely notated and defined, whereas there's the understanding, that basic structure of the tradition, but then how you elaborate on that and how you improvise from that. So in teaching this skill, how do you do that? And that's something that I think, as certainly in the Western school education system, we find a bit of a challenge. There is a bit more of a push to go down that route now, but that is something that doesn't necessarily come as naturally in a more didactic style of teaching. So I'd just like to ask Jen how she has seen, perhaps in her experience, some of her students embrace the idea of improvisation, and how have students develop their skill level in this way. And in answering that, perhaps you can refer to your experience. Has your improvisation also perhaps had to improve?
So there are three sort of parts of this question, and the first part being how am I engaging the students in activities on where they are then improvising. One of the things that I do notice, is everybody here a music teacher? Is that what we've got here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what I've noticed, because each school I've been in I've been there for 5 to 6 years. Programs to me gets developed, and what I find is at first, when I get to the school, it's quite different from what the students are used to. And I'm talking about elementary up through middle school and junior high, and that means ages 5 through about 14 that I'm working with currently and have in the past. It takes a little while at first for the students to be getting used to this different style, which is the holistic style of which you speak, or the style of, okay, we're just going to play, just follow my pattern, and we're going to be playing this on these particular drums. As a year and up into 2 years progresses, and the students that I teach have had a lot of experience with Chinese music, West African music, Indian, Irish, and there's something, so the tip of the iceberg, but music from many places, Arabic music. What I find then is when we get to activities where they're doing perhaps compositions in music are contrasting loud and soft, or for the little ones it really would just be loud and soft, or it might be fast and slow. What I find is they start to then say, well, we want to do the instruments we want to use are the djembe. So the instruments we want to use are the doumbeks. And then what I find too is they're pulling from their memory banks some of the rhythms that we learned in those lessons.
And so integrating them perhaps with some of the more familiar Western type rhythms.
Right. Yes, and if they're told, okay, put together, in your little group, put together a rhythm and play it fast together, and then play it slowly together. And what I find is they will default to the rhythms that we have done in our multicultural studies. And so that is a mixture of concepts in music, but as well ideas that they've learned when we have targeted these geographical areas. And sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I probably that's also a reflection of my own experiences, whereas they have to have a basic building blocks to start with, because if you just ask children to come up with just create something, that they will, that they're a lot more adventurous, I think, than a lot of adults, and they will create something, but often they feel comfortable by having that knowledge sort of as a grounding and from which to build on. And on the level of skill that they develop, let's say from an improvisation perspective, is that they will draw on what they've learned in the lesson, sort of as the fundamental building blocks, but then they might change it. And they'll think that that's fun and different to actually change that, and try and actually encourage that, because that's part of the I suppose the skill of improvisation, of elaboration, not just going with what's been taught to them. So I think the fact that they're actually drawing, as you said, on some of their memory banks to bring in those fundamental building blocks of rhythms, different rhythms, that then they'll extend that and go with that.
Yeah, and what is fun too is, and I find it's very much connected to with personality of children. Those who are more outgoing will then say, yeah, but let's do this, let's try this, let's add this. Or they'll start out with a rhythm that we might have done in Chinese lion dance with but then they'll say, yeah, but now let's play the rhythm of the Mario, the Mario DS game, because that's really a cool rhythm. And so they're pulling from all this, but recreating something just within all the different contexts that they're pulling in, and so that has built on that creativity.
Yes, and I mean that's actually a facet of creativity, is to be able to bring together a lot of diverse, different, maybe not remote ideas which you wouldn't necessarily think to associate, but the fact that they have the knowledge of perhaps quite a variety of different cultures there, of musical knowledge, is that they can develop a higher level of musicality, because they can draw in those different rhythms or different types of timbres or different types of structures.
Yeah.
I mean, the second part of the question, have you noticed that your experience or your skill development has changed over the years as you apply different?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I think also what you build up as you learn different musics is the ability to absorb rhythms more quickly, because you've opened up your brain to having to really listen. And I know that many years ago, as a younger teacher, I would always be trying to notate, and that would help me and help jog my memory. And it got to the point though where I could just remember, as I pictured the instrument and pictured the situation, remember a lot of the rhythms that we were doing. And I think it's that Cole, no, I didn't say the name right, but he said that as a djembe player, he says, I will teach you rhythms, and you will remember some of them, and you will come back to me to be reminded of some more of those rhythms. But when you go out and you hear other rhythms, you will then know the rhythms you have learned, but you will have also opened up that area that allows you to then take in more rhythms. And so I think that's one of the things I've found is what's the words? You just get good at being able to hear different rhythms and internalize those different rhythms, and then to play them. And technique, fortunately, and I speak mainly in percussive instruments, non-pitched.
Because I think, let's face it, for younger children, that's certainly probably where you go first, because it's something that they can pick up, relatively easily, whereas the pitched instruments take a little bit more skill acquisition. Yeah.
Right at the time. Yeah. I have a question for you. And it's because my interest, of course, again, is a different approaches, and one of the how do you, in your classes or with your groups, how do you approach looking at or trying to build creativity? How would you start that and then move with that with your students?
Well, I think that actually follows on from what we were just discussing there, is that you can, the teaching style, I think, is very influential in how you actually develop the students. So if you're looking at one end of the spectrum being sort of teaching in a very didactic style, in a very directive style, the children may feel comfortable with that and they will follow that, but it doesn't necessarily open up so much opportunity for experimenting, for allowing them to have that exploration. So I'm very much an advocate of, I suppose, the Swanwick idea about allowing that exploration to happen. Having said that, they still will want some, and if we're going to impart knowledge about the different traditions, we want to have some element of authenticity there as well. So you've got to try and balance that level of authenticity with the exploration. So understanding, I think, the variety of different building blocks, and perhaps that means that there is some rote learning at the beginning. With the Hindustani tabla that we've been doing, the tradition of that style is very much that it is very done in quite a rote style at the beginning. In fact, for many years, and the improvisation doesn't probably happen until there's a level of skill acquired. So you do want to provide that level of knowledge to the students to give them something then to grow on. So if you don't really have anything to start with. Having said that, what I've tried to do is sort of structure a program where you allow a bit of that didactic side of the rote learning, memorisation side, with the time for exploration. So one of the important areas that we're seeing is that imagination plays a very big part in creativity. And how do you foster that imagination in the children in the class? I've actually introduced storytelling as part of that program. So it may be that if we're doing North Indian tabla, then we'll use perhaps an Indian folk tale as the basis. Have that story there as the thread that links all of the various lessons on North Indian tabla, and allow the students to come up with their own sounds as they get to know the tabla better, their own sounds to accompany that story. So it would actually be reading the story and then them saying, okay, let's make the sounds of this on the tabla. And actually, right from the youngest children, they're very keen to do that. I found that interesting how they were not scared at all to
Yeah.
So I think it's a balance, really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I mean, how would you feel on that?
In terms of balance.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of teaching creatively, would you also the level of experimenting versus sort of didactic teaching?
Yeah, I think, and as educators, music educators, you know your students and you know what is working and where they are in their comfort zones. I think we talked earlier a little bit about risk-taking and going out of comfort zones and being comfortable with, what was that term?
Yeah, tolerance of uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt there, but that's some of you I'm sure will be familiar with Hub Skipper's Facing the Music, and he actually had on his continuum, his model there, one of his factors as being tolerance of uncertainty. And I think that's actually a very key element in many of the musics that we're talking about. One, for the nature of improvisation, not being sure where to go, but secondly because if children are coming to new musics, everything's unfamiliar at the beginning. So they have to have that certain level of confidence to be able to sort of explore and to go with it. And to encourage it as educators, for us to encourage that and not be scared to actually try new things is quite important. I think that's a really key factor for world music education.
Yeah, and that leads into the concept too of when we say tolerance of uncertainty, the risk-taking and the boldness factor of jumping in and saying, okay, this may or may not work exactly how I imagined it, and it may well bomb the first time. One of the things I really love about being an educator is you can bomb one day and then you've got the rest of the school year to fix that. So it's not something that has to be perfect right away. I think that's one of the factors that really affects an educator's approach and the success or lack of success in their program is being able to say, okay, that didn't work. Let's look at how we can do this and how we can restructure and take it on from a different perspective.
I mean, I would ask you too, perhaps the fact that in a classroom situation, and often it is a rather unauthentic situation, and we don't always have all the instruments that we'd like. Sometimes you have to make do with what you've got, and in fact, you may then be trying to impart knowledge about a particular music on instruments that are really not designed for that music.
Right.
So, I mean, there's uncertainty in that, isn't there? How it's all going to hang together.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing too when you consider that aspect of it with the idea of authenticity. And one of the things I always refer to in terms of that is many cultures have had to just find what they can to be percussion instruments, and it might be from the garbage heap, or it might be from just things they have found. So when it comes to the idea of authenticity, chances are that not every culture anyway always uses their absolute traditional instruments. Some of them may not have them. So I have that one perspective. I know that I dare say, now I know teachers in Canada and I know teachers in the international schools, but is there anyone here who ever uses plastic buckets in their, okay, never mind. I was going to say that the 10-liter buckets are great, and then when you can get the great big one, fantastic things. Go to the hardware store and you get mallets and buckets for way less than it would cost for a traditional instruments. And if you guys are secretly frowning on me, go ahead. I can take that risk. But I think one of the things that students learn too is that not everything is going to be a perfectly made and structured, constructed musical instrument. Sometimes many people have to find what they can use as instruments. The other side of that is then taking what instruments you have. And again, this will be something tomorrow we'll be looking at and saying, all right, so we don't have the absolute perfect instrument. We don't have let's say a hatse. Well, what instruments do we have that can substitute? And that, excuse me, that does not, the main thing is that it doesn't take away from the musical experience of the students. The students are making music. Maybe they're not making it on the traditional instruments from which music originally came, but they are engaged and involved. And I always think if my students leave the classroom loving music, then my job's done. They walk out and they say, man, that was so cool.
And in fact, a lot of children, they enjoy that experimentation, that it's trying something different, which perhaps hasn't been done before, and they can see that, this is the first for the teacher as well. So
yeah,
I think that's...
Yeah, and the whole thing then as well, from the teacher, coming from the teacher, the feedback from the teacher, and that's so powerful, as we know, as teachers, giving just the right feedback at the right time, and seeing the students just loving what they're doing because of you. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So that there's such a balance there too of what you're doing in the classroom, what you're bringing into the classroom, and how you're reinforcing that in the classroom. And it happens not necessarily in one type or pocketing different types of music. I mean, it's teaching music in general and how we facilitate this. And something you touched on too is often I give the students the responsibility of making instrument substitutions. And they have to listen or watch. I know I thank God for, or whoever we want to be thanking, for YouTube. How many people in here use YouTube? Yeah. Oh, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have YouTube, and oh my gosh, trying to get the best video footage we could of some of these music cultures was difficult. And you'd find it and you'd go, finally, yes, but now it's very easy to find it. And so when you're talking about authenticity and instrument substitution, bring it right up on the screen. They can say, oh, this is what it looks like. Geez, what's in here that kind of will work? So.
And I've actually used that too. If you're introducing a new culture, new music, they may have heard of the name, or but a lot of children, younger children particularly, won't know really much about it, where it comes from, or what traditions are behind it. So, the digital aspects are, I think, also very good to draw on. What we've done in this recent program is actually bring in using YouTube a lot of the time, the understanding of the dance components, the association of the dance with the music, for example, with African djembe. Obviously, dance and music are so closely aligned in the learning of that African musical arts. You really can't separate them, and so not to have the movement side of it really doesn't make sense. So you can show some examples of that, and actually then take the children through and get them active with some of the movement. And I think that actually helps to reinforce some of the kinesthetic learning as well.
Yes, yeah, it really does, and it's something we'll be doing. Sure. Something we'll be doing tomorrow too. It's involving people in playing and movement, because as Shari says, it's really important that both of those are going together, because so much movement goes with the music. And I always love to watch too my students when they are trying to take on some of these different types of movement. And I will never forget one of my students from Brazil, who had just moved from Brazil and absolutely loved dancing and loved samba. And we were doing the lion dance from China, and she gets the big lion head over her, and then starts to samba with the lion head on top. And it was such a delightful crossover of her language, and then this completely different language.
Well, I think ultimately that is an objective that we have as music educators, is not to, for the children to come away not thinking, okay, well, that is samba music and I can only do it in that context. That's Hindustani classical and I can only do it in that context. But understanding, developing what we call sort of some polymusicality, and so then they can mix and match, as it were, in their set of musical tools that they have, and hopefully they become, a broader musicians for having that knowledge. So rather than thinking, I think Walden was a French researcher, philosopher maybe, who coined this about music of the other. And if we think of only learning culturally diverse music as being something, well, that's a different type of music, and that's the way that we impart that to children. They will think of that as quite something quite separate. I think both Jen and I are very much advocates of trying to think of this is about learning music of the world's cultures, and the variety of different sounds, structures, timbres, rhythms that exist. Children acquire those and learn those, and then they have a much broader capacity and a much broader tool set from which to draw on. And it then becomes that you're not thinking of the different musics as something separate, but it becomes just essentially part of music.
It's all music.
Sorry, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
In fact, I think there's a bit of program.
So as you've been talking, and I'm sorry, I'm so tired. It's a 7-hour trip. So. But I am listening.
Where did you from?
Egypt.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Are you in one of the international schools?
Yes.
Cairo, American?
Not Cairo, American International.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
You have to go and listen to Joseph Tawadros.
I know, I've already inquired. Yes. I've been thinking, well, what you just said a lot about the aspect of teaching something as the right kind of, these are the classics, what I like to call the dead white guy music. These are the classics, and then this is the other stuff. And how our words, how careful are you with your words when you're teaching, especially the little ones, especially when they're from another country maybe, and so you're not sometimes teaching about their own culture and their own music, and I get pushed a lot to do the Western notation and the Western classics, and I try to explain, 80%, 90% of world music is not like that. That's actually a small fraction. So I'm wondering how, like, with administration and with with other grains of thought, how you kind of handled that in
Mhm.
your
Uh,
careers.
With each school I've been at, I've looked at what they present as the curriculum and how I have to follow it. I do know what you mean though about a lot of people saying, well, are you going to teach all the notes sort of thing? You can teach them all the notes and how to read them. And
You have to write down a notation.
yeah. One of my answers, I think, I guess right from as a younger teacher was here's what I feel and here's what I do, and not if they say you're going to teach them to read notation, I'll say those who are interested in it, sure, and those are the students that I think, and probably you have there that probably are taking private lessons or something, and I boldly move ahead and say, here's what we will be learning. We'll be learning everything that's in the curriculum. But just if something is talking about them, the students will understand the difference between high and low and upward and downward. And that's where I just go into, okay, great. And we're going to take high notes, or low notes, let's say, from Tibetan monks and their chanting. And for me, it's just a question of saying, that's not really going to give the children the most diverse music education if I have to stick with just Eurocentric stuff. Now, I don't know how strong the administration is wanting you to teach. Are you elementary? Or?
Yeah, I'm elementary, early childhood.
Okay. Yeah.
And in this situation, I have a lot of freedom, but I just know that that's something that music teachers still run into a lot. Even in the text, the music textbooks, it's presented as music and then world music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not considered music.
Music,
right.
yes,
separate.
Right.
Exactly.
And I ignore the teachers' editions and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this actually comes maybe to a point that you've been looking at, I know a lot in your work, is how you actually structure a curriculum. And if you've got essentially control of that music curriculum for the year, and you want to introduce and learn a variety of different types of music, then rather than thinking, okay, well, we're going to have 6 weeks of learning Brazilian surdo rhythms and Malaysian campaign, think of it as like we're going to look at rhythm for the next term. And you then use a variety of different musics to actually illustrate the point. So it becomes a lot more integrated, I think, rather than, okay, we're looking at Brazilian this time. But that's maybe something, and you can be introducing a number of different musics in the one lesson. And children start to think of that in a different way. So it starts early.
Yeah, it would be a question of, I don't know if you have Pat Campbell's book, Teaching Music Globally.
No.
That would be a great start, because she has all these, she and Bonnie Waite just
very
list.
good program.
Yeah, it's a great one for teachers who are saying, okay, how do I jump into this? And so if that's if that is an approach that you're thinking of, all right, I don't want to be doing Western and other, then looking at, and again, we'll be talking about this more tomorrow at the workshop, is how to really look at your year and structure it and stick to that as your anchor, and then all the other stuff that of course comes along during the year.
Because I've used a lot of Mary Getsy's stuff, which is great, but it's very performance-based.
Mhm.
And I want to utilize it more, like you said, to actually just teach the concepts.
Yes, experiential.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can, I don't know if I have Pat's book here with me right now. No, I don't. I usually carry it with me.
Yeah.
That would
I
be,
can give you the reference.
yeah, Pat Campbell's book. I can talk to you after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So that's what you're talking about the administration. What about the panelists? I was just opened a music academy in Qatar 2 years ago. We have about 580 students now. But most of the families, when they come, bring their child. They're expecting us to teach them music as they know it. for example, 85% of the students, they want to learn the piano, and the rest are violin.
Yes.
Right. That's
Western classical music?
Western
or-
classical, yes, of course. And we have a very big percussion department, which includes all the world music, percussions and all that. And when they register for learning percussion, the only thing in their mind is drums, Western drums.
Yeah, like drum set, Western.
Drum set,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
So how do you deal with that with the families?
Look, I think it is a good point. It's actually interesting, something that I had been researching a few years ago, in fact, is looking at the rise of the classical music in China and perhaps also in some of the Arab countries, whereas that is actually diminishing the interest in let's say the audiences for the classical music in the West was diminishing. So it's sort of a little bit ironic, but I think there has to be some element of accepting what the country and what the families are wanting, as far as you're looking if that's the classical side. But if somehow you can actually integrate a program where saying, yes, I'm teaching the piano, but when you teach the piano, in fact that's my first instrument, and I sort of came up from a very traditional Western classical way of learning. But now as I started to go more into the world music side, I've actually started to incorporate different world musics into some of the teaching. So I may teach them some salsa piano, for example, which, there's some great salsa rhythms that you can do on the piano. So I think it's probably a little bit of trying to incorporate both into that. I don't think, we're not saying, I suppose we're not saying, oh, that means you don't teach any Western classical music, because obviously that is still,
World music?
yeah, it
Music
is.
of the world, yeah.
That's right. But it's maybe looking at a program that's a bit more holistic, and so saying, yes, we're going to teach you piano, but we're going to give you skills that, maybe a bit of jazz as well. Maybe,
Yeah, well, is this in a school or a music school specifically?
Specific music schools, that's after hours.
Oh, okay, so
Sort of
community,
full-time.
so music school. All right, and so you're there saying, wow, we have all these other options, but the families are saying, here's what we want.
That's right.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
Besides, they want after the end of every year, they want a certificate. They just thinking about that. I mean, certificate, my son,
Right.
my daughter received
It's a,
college grade
it's a
1, grade
point
2 and a
of-
half.
yeah, and it's a point of educating the families as well, isn't it? On, yes, we can do this. Let's also explore this sort of style, and as Shari says, integrating some of it in. But I do know what you mean, because I've experienced that as well, and it takes time. I think one of the strengths is to be able to even take a small group that are really interested in the more diverse look at it, perspective, and take that group and give them as much exposure as you can in the community, in the perhaps the school, in recitals, to start to educate the audience as well. Here's some other stuff that's happening. Again, though, it does take time. And the school I'm at right now started with a world drum club of about 5 kids, and now is quite big. But that took 3 years to get that going. And as we were talking about earlier, I also made it very visible at assemblies, concerts, lunchtime, whenever we could, just to get people exposed to these different sounds and different ideas. And again, it takes some while to perhaps educate the community.
I mean, one thing I would probably say, is unfortunate is that in many countries, there is a culture of doing exams, particularly for instrumental music, and a lot of the exam programs are fairly traditional.
Right.
They don't incorporate the full spectrum of musics we're talking about. I mean, one thing that does come to mind, we started to see a little bit of a move towards, as I said, I do have a lot of piano students, with the Australian Music Examination Board, that they've got one strand of examinations which are piano for leisure, and the technical requirements are still the same as the piano series. However, they've incorporated some repertoire which you could say goes towards, let's say, it's more of token, but there is some different culture. So there's repertoire which perhaps is doing some Cuban piano music. So I think that's encouraging, but still a long way to go.
Are there, do you have your
Yes,
stories?
yes. So you are talking on the one part about classroom teaching in a multicultural context in international schools. Isn't that your task? What you are talking
Some, though
about?
I'm right now I'm in a public school in Canada. So.
In Canada, yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, and your school is like studio teaching.
It's started as a studio teaching, but it's intended to be a full-time music
Yes.
school.
Yes. And I am from Lausanne, Switzerland, and I was for a long time a piano teacher, didactics teacher, and the director of the institution. And I was thinking a lot of these things. How should and how could we introduce the world's music in a very good and a broad sense, in an intelligent way?
Mm-hmm.
And I can just tell that how it worked in our context. Most of the students come with the wish to really learn to sing and play an instrument. And there is actually no other really didactic way than to go from A to B, C to D, and this is what the classical foundation has given us. And then in this context, I can't tell to the people that now, no, we are not going to do that because we are going to. So I tried to find the teachers who have another cultural background and who really know how to play salsa.
Right.
A Japanese teacher of solfège who really knows the pentatonic scales of I don't know how many countries. Or then optional courses by really clever people who teach the Arab violin or who teach the popular music of La Suisse romande, for that matter, because we also have the diversity in your own country.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this was the, let's say, the cleverest way to introduce the broad sense, but in a perfect competence.
Mm-hmm.
Ask a normal piano teacher, you know what I mean, to do that. He or she would be completely frustrated.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I think that actually you bring up a very important point, is that how as teachers, if we don't have that cultural background and we don't have that knowledge,
Yeah.
how do we actually teach? Yes, and I mean, it is actually quite scary if you're faced with having to do something. And I think, I mean, what I've been doing as part of the program that I'm doing is working together with specialists in each of the different musics, because it really is required to have that level of knowledge if you want to do that. However, people like Jen, who actually sort of gone around the world and developed their own in-depth knowledge, I suppose you now feel fairly proficient, don't you, at many of them?
Well, yeah, a number of them. But like I was saying too, that once you have learned diverse, different things, it really, it's like languages. Once you learn a couple languages, it's easier to, you know how you learn the next one, sort of thing. But you're right, the idea of culture bearers and finding them. And but after a while too of working with those culture bearers, then I think we as teachers get to a point where we can then do it ourselves.
Yes, I mean you develop a level of confidence, I suppose, and knowledge, and then you're able to impart that.
That would be the way, but if you are a director or a teacher in a given school, you can't just find a teacher like that. You have to, it takes time.
Yes.
And then one way I forgot, one thing, very good thing was to start with the small kids, the initiation. That's where all doors are open. And to find the teachers to those classes, be they Dalcos or whatever, whatever their own formation, who have this broad sense, and that's where it starts. But then how to continue,
Yeah.
it's a tricky thing.
Well, it is, and building a culture of diversity within the school it takes time and it takes energy and being bold.
Yeah, I mean, Melissa tomorrow will talk a little bit, because that's particularly a colleague, she's looked particularly around the policy areas and how to sort of get the programs more accepted, I suppose, into the, certainly into the curriculums, but even from private schools. It's not just about getting it into the curriculum, it's actually getting that accepted from a family sense and a social sense. Yes, this is something that is important for the kids to have. We were just in the other panel, they were talking about, you know, Australia being a very culturally diverse society, or multicultural, whichever terminology you want to use, but that needs to be reflected in the things that we actually teach, and it's probably got a little way to go yet.
Do you have anything to share?
Well, here's a question to you about Chinese, Indian culture. What you received from this music? I mean, personally, because I read your CV now,
Oh?
and I was just interested what you get from Orient, from this music.
You mean when I listen to it, or when
No,
I'm playing?
when you play it there, when you, well, you told at the beginning that you were listening Chinese opera,
Yes.
and all people understood very well what was going on, and you not. And now, what is your feeling?
Well, and what enjoyment do I get out of it? I guess would be, because so much of my work is with the students and sharing it with the students. I think for me, with Chinese opera, the fascination is with the timbres, especially of the percussion instruments in Chinese opera. The technique for singing is fascinating to me as well. The female voice. Also, though, I love the mixture of the percussion and then the battle scene in Chinese opera. And again, I often look at diverse musics in terms of, okay, how am I going to bring this into the classroom? But I think you're asking me, what do I personally love about Chinese opera? I think also the distinct use of symbolism in Chinese opera, and to watch a really good Chinese opera professional perform. For example, another thing that really amazed me was the fact that everything is symbolized. For example, the women won't cry when they're very sad about something. One of the reasons being practical, all that fabulous makeup would just run. The other thing being that they can intimate sadness, and the way she would hold up her handkerchief and bring it to her eye and move her face as she sang, and how powerful that was to really depict the sorrow and sadness, and yet not have actually someone sitting there heaving sort of in grief sort of thing, but that they could depict this. So the use of symbolism in that particular art.
Yes, but we are talking about symbolism, about theater, and I'm thinking just about music.
That's
What do you take? I mean, and do you use any, let's say, Chinese style of playing, or something which was very musical in your teaching with Western students in Canada? And
okay,
States?
certainly, yes. Yes, and especially one of the bridges that I use is the battle scene from Chinese opera, the battle scene. Lots of percussion, lots of drums, cymbals, gongs, and that is actually a great genre to be teaching students. Yeah, because the cymbals and gongs are not expensive, and they're not that hard to find anymore. And so, again, when I was saying that I'm always looking at it, how can I do this with the children? I start there with the battle scene and talking about the symbolism and all this stuff, and then usually they're really interested, and then they want to learn about the singing style. And by then, chances are, they are so interested in it that it's not going to be oh my gosh, this is so different, we can't do this. I involve the children in making up their own faces and bringing in the whole picture.
The whole story. I
Yes,
found that
holistic.
too. I think whether it's Chinese or, you know, I talked about, say, with the gamelan, we're going through with a lot of Javanese folk tales, and actually the puppetry that the Wayang would do along with that. So, and they love that, to be able to understand how the music actually fits into the whole picture. So particularly children who I think are very imaginative type learners, and the visualisation is important. So maybe the fact that Chinese opera is so much of a spectacle is part of it as well.
Bringing them into the story. Yeah, because I also do the lion dance, which is very physical, and so they learn the basic rhythms of the lion dance on the big drum and the cymbals and gongs, but involving them in the dance part. I think it's really, for me, I'm such a kinesthetic teacher, learner. I don't want to sit there and talk to them. I'm saying, come on, let's do this, let's try this. And so I think with every type of music, in answer to your question, it's really looking at the whole picture and seeing how it all fits together. And I dare say that there are some students who still might not love whatever particular type of music we might be looking at, but the fact that they know about it is really crucial to me. Do we need to be wrapping up our... Yes.
Unless anyone else has a question, I think we might wrap it up there. And thank you very much, Shari and Jennifer. It's been a fascinating session, and I imagine everybody would agree with me. I'm also a music educator, so very, very interesting. And I love the way you've combined the idea of the musical with the visual. I think the storytelling aspect of it really is what especially young children appreciate.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. It's been fascinating, and I think we've had this on film. So
Good.
And tomorrow we've just a little plug to come along tomorrow.
Lots of activity tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll definitely be doing the kinesthetic learning tomorrow.
But thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks to you.